Hello everyone, thank you for joining this new episode of FEA Insight. Today we're going to discuss what are modeling techniques. So first, why this webinar? Over the years, through my consulting work, online courses and posts on LinkedIn, I often emphasized one idea. Modeling techniques are at the heart of successful finite element analysis. And every time I bring this up, a common question follows: what exactly do you mean by modeling techniques? That simple yet powerful question is exactly what I want to do this episode today. In this session, I want to bring clarity to what modeling techniques really are, why they matter so much, and how mastering them is a game changer for everyone using finite element analysis. Whether you're working in aerospace, automotive, energy, heavy industry, and so on, or any field that relies on simulation for structural integrity and performance. Let me be very clear here. Mastering the software interface or pressing the solve button is not what makes someone effective in FEA. It's not even about the mesh density or solver settings, at least not at the first. True success begins before the first element is created. It begins with how you conceptualize and translate the real world problem into a simulation model. That's where modeling techniques come in. During this presentation, I walk you through what modeling techniques really mean in a practical FEA context, how they differ from meshing or solver control, why they are critical for simulation credibility and engineering decisions. My goal here is not to make this theoretical. It's to show you how this knowledge implies to real projects and why every FEA engineer, junior or senior, needs to master this core discipline to move from analysis results to engineering insight. So let's get started, because FEA success doesn't start with the mesh. It starts with the modeling techniques. Let's begin by answering the core question that inspired today's webinar. What exactly do we mean by modeling techniques in the context of FEA? Modeling techniques refer to the engineering strategies, assumptions, and simplifications used to convert a real-world mechanical structure into a numerically solvable simulation model. One that gives results we can trust within acceptable accuracy and computational cost. This is the most foundational layer in the FEA process. Before you mesh a model or run a solver, you need to decide what to model, what not to model, and how to model it. These are modeling technique decisions. And these decisions dictate everything that follows: accuracy, runtime, interpretation, and even the credibility of your simulation. Let me break this down into 6 core aspects of modeling techniques. First, geometry simplification. You know that we never model full CAD geometry as is. For example, fillets, small holes, or fine cosmetic details may be irrelevant for stress or deformation results. So, modeling techniques is knowing what to suppress and what to keep based on the load path and the expected stress behavior that your simulation will have to capture. The second core aspect is material representation. Real materials can behave as a nonlinear material, an orthotropic material, an anisotropic material, temperature dependently, something like that, okay? So modeling technique involves choosing the appropriate material definitions, isotropic, orthotropic, linear, nonlinear, stuff like that. Or even the need for a composite material, like layups in composite. Third aspect, core aspect, is loads and boundary condition definition. Very, very important and also difficult aspect of modeling techniques. How are loads applied in the reality? Are they distributed or point loads? Do they vary with time or temperature? Or the boundary conditions over-constraining the model? You have to answer this question. So keep in mind that poor boundary conditions can artificially increase the stiffness and distort stresses, even in a perfectly matched model. Now we have the fourth core aspect of modeling techniques, which is element type and model dimensionality. Here it is related to the knowledge of the library of elements. Should your model be modeled as using 1D elements, 1D beam elements, or 2D shells, or even 3D solid TET or eggs elements? For example, using solid TET elements on a thin wall structure instead of shells, for example, gives wrong results due to shear locking if bending is dominant. So choosing the right element is a modeling technique rooted in engineering understanding. As I said before, the knowledge of the library of elements related to the solver you are using. Then we have connections and contacts. Should you model bolted joints with beam elements, MPC, springs, or even a simplified node-to-node approach? Keep in mind that connections define the load transfer, okay, between the parts of your model, because most of the time when we do a simulation in order to solve a structural problem, we have multiple parts. We don't have a single part. So we have to connect them together, and we have to make sure that we capture properly the load transfer between the parts. And a poor modeling of the fastener can invalidate the global stiffness and even the local stress field in your model. So choosing the right modeling technique for the bolted joints is fundamental. Also, you have to do a choice in terms of contact, the right type of contact. Is it a glue? Is it a sliding? Is it frictionless? Is it a with friction? And it's critical when interactions exist between different parts of an assembly. So the choice of the right type, of the type of contact, I should say, will strongly influence the behavior of the structure. Then you have, to conclude with the core aspect of modeling techniques, you have the selection of the type of solution. It is one of the key modeling technique decisions every analyst must make. And it is what type of analysis is appropriate for the physical behavior I am trying to simulate. And that starts with understanding the dominant behavior of your structure under loading. It will define if you run linear or nonlinear solution, static or buckling solution, or do you need a simple model analysis or even a more complex dynamic analysis. So modeling techniques are not meshing tricks or solver settings. They are your engineering judgment tools. How you make a real structure speak the language of FEA. Think of them as the toolbox of decisions that define whether your simulation reflects reality. This is why I like to say FEA success doesn't start with the mesh. It starts with selection of the right modeling techniques. This is one of the most important clarification I want to make early in the presentation. Modeling techniques are not the same thing as meshing. These two are often confused. especially with newcomers or engineers transitioning into simulation roles. But while they are related, they serve very different purposes in the simulation workflow. Let's draw the distinction clearly now. Modeling techniques define the structural representation and the physical fidelity of the model. Meshing, on the other hand, is about discretization. It takes the already decided model, the result of your modeling techniques, and converts it into finite elements for numerical computations. But a perfect mesh on a poor model leads to poor results. Meshing involves element size and density, local refinement, mesh quality, mesh convergence strategy. Okay? These are crucial for solution accuracy, but they only work if the model itself is correctly defined. So here are two key points I want to share with you. First, a perfect mesh applied to a poorly conceived model will still produce wrong or misleading results. And unfortunately, a highly refined mesh can sometimes give a false sense of confidence, especially when the model includes unrealistic boundary conditions or oversimplified load path or invalid assumptions. So modeling techniques are driven by engineering understanding. It's about how you idealize the problem. Meshing is just a numerical step. It's how you prepare the model for the solver. This is why I always say, don't confuse simulation setup with simulation credibility. On this slide, you see two models. The one on the left shows a finely meshed aircraft with excellent mesh quality, but it has poorly constrained, for example. The one on the right shows a coarser mesh, but the modeling assumptions are correct. It is properly constrained, for example, with the correct applied loading, the correct applied material model, okay? And it's aligned with the physics of the real world structure. Which model do you trust more? It's the one built with the good modeling techniques, the coarser mesh, okay? So in summary, meshing helps you compute. Modeling techniques help you ask the right question and simulate the right physics, which is fundamental when you do a simulation by FEA. So let's get to the art of it. Modeling technique is not software knowledge, it's engineering judgment. You don't need to be a power user of your FEA software to build a credible model. You need to think like an engineer. This is a mindset shift. We are not just running simulations. We are making technical decisions and shape the outcome of those simulations. It's about engineering thinking. Modeling technique isn't about clicking the right buttons. It's about thinking like an engineer. Software is your tool, but you are the analyst. The value of the analysis lies not in the mesh, but in the modeling decisions that frame the problem in a physically meaningful way. So now that we've talked about what modeling techniques are and why they require engineering judgment, let's look at the consequences of not applying them properly. The following slides highlight 5 of the most frequently and costly pitfalls that analysts face when modeling techniques are ignored or misunderstood. First, over-modeling, too detailed. You just import the full CAD and you mesh it up. This is a very common trap, especially for those new to FEA. In that case, you get extremely long solve times, mesh quality issues in fine details, massive files with little added value, and a model that's very hard to debug or interpret. So over-modeling happens when the analyst fails to distinguish between functional geometry and non-functional details. And this is not engineering, it's just throwing complexity at the solver. Remember, more details doesn't mean more accuracy. Good modeling technique involves purposeful simplification that preserves the correct structural behavior. Another common pitfall is under-modeling. Okay? On the other end of the spectrum, under-modeling results in a simulation that's fast and clean, but missed important physics. The common issues with under-modeling are ignoring fillets in fatigue critical areas, skipping contact in joints, and assuming perfect bonding, representing flexible components as rigid, for example. And again, this leads to false confidence in results. And it's dangerous because it can mask failure modes, like, for example, a local yielding, a buckling, an instability problem, or even a load redistribution. Another common pitfall, as I mentioned before, is the wrong boundary condition. This is arguably one of the most damaging mistakes in structural FEA. Wrong boundary condition might over-constrain your model, artificially increasing stiffness, or create unrealistic stress distributions, or block expected deformation modes, and you will miss some behavior. You will not capture some behavior with your simulation. Or also force a load path that does not exist in the reality. Often the stress field may look good, but it's built on invalid assumptions. And that undermines the entire analysis, the entire simulation. So boundary conditions are not just a setup step. They are a core modeling decision. Also, a common pitfall is wrong element choice. And this is another classic modeling pitfall. The typical examples are using solid elements where the shells should suffice, okay, in thin wall structures, for example, or also using truss elements for frames that experience bending and torsion. You know that the truss element cannot capture the bending and the torsion effects. Or also using 2D membrane element instead of full shell capabilities. It is another typical example of wrong element choice. The results of that will be inaccurate stresses, incorrect stiffness, misleading the mode shapes, and unreliable local deformations, for example. And this happens when the analyst treats element type as a software choice rather than an engineering choice. Another common pitfall is the wrong solution choice. Okay? It's selecting the wrong type of analysis for the physics you're trying to simulate. Too often, analysts default to linear static analysis for everything, regardless of whether the structure undergoes large deformations, contact, material yielding, or time-dependent loads. But here is the reality. If the physics are nonlinear, the solution must be nonlinear. If the behavior is time-dependent, you need to run a dynamic analysis. If you are evaluating stability, you need to run a buckling solution. And if resonance is a concern, you must run a model analysis. So choosing the wrong solution type leads to misleading stresses or displacements, ignore the failure modes like instability, for example, and a false sense of confidence in the results. And again, this is not a software error, it's a modeling technique failure. So solution choice is part of the modeling technique. It must be based on a clear understanding of the structure's behavior and the engineering question you need to answer. So always ask, what physical behavior am I expecting and what solution type can capture it? What is common across all these pitfalls? They all stem from a lack of modeling techniques, a lack of engineering consideration at the model definition level. FEA is not just about running simulations, it's about building credible digital representations of real mechanical behavior. Without modeling techniques, you can have the best mesh, the right solver, beautiful post-processing, and still produce results that are fundamentally wrong. At this point of the presentation, we've covered what modeling techniques are, why they require engineering judgment, and what happens when they are ignored. Let's now zoom out and look at the bigger picture. What does it really take to deliver a reliable FEA result? Just like a physical structure, a successful simulation is built on a foundation. And at the base of that foundation are the modeling techniques. They are the bedrock of your analysis. They define what physical problem are you solving, how are you simplifying the structure, what loads and boundary conditions apply, how do parts interact, what elements reflect the structural behavior. If the modeling techniques are flawed, the entire pyramid becomes unstable. No matter how good your mesh or solver setup is, this is where most simulation failures begin. Not in the mesh, not in the solver, but in the modeling assumptions. Once the model is properly defined, only then do we talk about meshing. The mesh affects numerical accuracy, stress resolution, local refinement and critical zones, and element distortion or aspect ratio, for example. But remember, a great mesh can't fix a bad model. You can't mesh your way out of poor modeling decisions. At the top of the pyramid are your solver choices. Linear versus linear, static versus dynamic, the contact formulation, the convergence tolerances, the load stepping, stuff like that. These are important, but they are just solver side controls. They help the numerical engine do its job, but only after the model is correctly defined and meshed. The key takeaway here is FEA success is not driven by how well you know the software. It's driven by how well you define the problem. You must get the modeling techniques right first, then focus on the mesh quality, and then refine the solver strategy. It's a hierarchy of credibility. And if you get the base wrong, the whole simulation becomes unreliable. Modeling techniques are the foundation of simulation credibility. As we wrap up this talk, let's bring everything back to one key message. FEA is not about pressing buttons. It's about making engineering decisions. But speed is not the same as credibility. A result that looks colorful and polished doesn't mean it reflects reality. What defines quality in FEA is not the mesh, is not the solver setting, is not the post-processing. It's the modeling techniques, the engineering judgment behind the model. That's why I believe modeling techniques are your most critical skill as an FEA engineer. You can't outsource this part. You can't automate it, and you have to build it through training, practice, and experience. Let me leave you with this quote. You don't validate the model by checking the mesh. You validate it by asking if the model makes engineering sense. This is the mindset that separates someone who runs simulations from someone who produces engineering insight. So to conclude with this presentation, I want to leave you with one last message, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed by everything we've discussed about modeling techniques. Yes, mastering modeling techniques takes time. It requires practice, experimentation, and iteration, one scenario at a time. And that's completely normal. No one becomes an expert overnight. And I know that because I've been exactly where you are. Years ago, I faced the same doubts. Am I using the right simplification? Will my assumptions hold? How do I move from pressing buttons to engineering simulations? That learning curve is real. And it's precisely why I do what I do today. I offer the structured online training to help you build the skills that matter. And I also offer the one-on-one mentoring and coaching for engineers who want personalized support as they develop their FEA expertise. Okay? But here is the truth. You don't have to figure out this alone. If you're serious about learning FEA the right way, whether you're just starting or want to level up, I'd be honored to be your mentor, your FEA mentor. So if you reach out, I personally commit to supporting you in your day-to-day FEA learning process. Whether it's clarifying concepts, reviewing your approach, or helping you solve real-world simulation challenges, I'm here to help. So contact me directly and let's start the conversation on LinkedIn or even by email, and visit also the FEA Academy website because there are many resources on the website. Because together we are stronger and you can count on me. Thank you for watching and see you for another episode of FEA Insight.